Hello and welcome to the Smart Connections podcast and the Talk the Path podcast. My name is Anna Sanderlin. I am a warm-line facilitator for the University of Memphis Smart Center. The University of Memphis School of Social Work Smart Research, Training, and Treatment Center aims to provide evidence-based interventions for school-based mental health programming, increase access for school-based behavioral health programming in underserved areas, offer training on best practices in telebehavioral health, develop opportunities to research the use of technology in practice, and provide direct services to the state's most vulnerable populations. You can call the Smart Center at 901-678-1636. The University of Memphis Smart Center, in conjunction with the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, would like to present the Pathways to Behavioral Health Careers Project. The goals of the Pathways Project are to provide education and information on the various career opportunities in the field of behavioral health through presentations, increase interest in students in the field of behavioral health, provide opportunities for guidance with information regarding college, university programming that result in degrees for professions in the field of behavioral health, connect students with students in behavioral health programs and professionals in the field for further research. This podcast will feature students and professionals in the field to give a clear picture of the daily duties of these roles and how they help support their communities.
So my name is Emily Hughes. So for the past 5.5 years, I've been a licensed master social worker, so LMSW. As of yesterday afternoon, actually, I just got word that my LCSW, licensed clinical social work, was initially approved. So that's exciting.
Congratulations.
So I'm waiting for kind of final ratification, but I've got the initial approval, so it should come hopefully within the next couple of weeks. So that is a little bit of a change in my credentials. I do also have my license to practice school social work as well. My educational background, so I have an undergraduate degree, bachelor's in family and child sciences, and then I have a master's in education and a master's in social work as well. What I currently do, I'm a school-based therapist. I work with an organization called STARS, which is a behavioral health organization in Middle Tennessee. And it's kind of an interesting position. So they are the ones who actually hire me, but we are contracted to go into different elementary schools all over Middle Tennessee. So I work in the Murfreesboro area, and I work in elementary schools. We have people in all different kinds of schools, but I go in the elementary schools 5 days a week. And so I go to the STARS office maybe a few times a year, but most of my day-to-day is just working in the elementary schools.
Okay. Awesome. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey to your career pathway? So how you got to, this point in your, where you're getting approved for your LCSW. That's awesome.
Absolutely. It is a little bit of a kind of winding path. So I went to college straight out of high school. That's just kind of what I had always been expected to do. I went in, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I liked working with kids. I didn't really think I wanted to be in a school setting. So I didn't really want to go into education. I majored in family and child sciences, which is just very broad. I did a couple different field placements when I was in undergrad. So I worked at an outdoor preschool for a little bit. I also worked with adults with developmental disabilities. Still didn't really know which direction I was going to. Was getting ready to wrap up my degree, didn't really know what I wanted to do, decided to go to grad school. And again, I wasn't totally sure my direction. So I went to this program to get my master's of education. It was a little bit of a non-traditional program in the sense that it wasn't designed to go into the classroom. It was focused on non-traditional education settings. So museums and hospitals and nonprofits and all these different ways that you can use an education degree not in the schools. And so that was interesting experience because I got a lot of different field experiences out of that. So I think my first one was in a preschool that served kids with developmental disabilities. So it was kind of the preschool setting, but also there were a lot of speech therapists and feeding therapists and occupational therapists. So I got exposure, I think, to part of the therapy world through that. And then I worked in a museum for a little bit and did the education team over there. And then I did my final field placement in that program at a center in Nashville that serves survivors of sexual assault. And so that was, I think, kind of a turning point for me. It was very interesting. I worked with the prevention team over there. So we did a lot of education, a lot of teen dating violence prevention, but they also have a heavy clinical piece that I was just around just by being in the center. So I saw a lot of kind of the therapists and clients coming in and out. And so that really kind of piqued my interest there. Finished that degree, still didn't know really what I was doing. And so just started applying for jobs. And I got hired at a nonprofit in Nashville that worked exclusively with children with autism. So young children with autism, ages 2 to 6 usually. And it was providing ABA, applied behavioral analysis, which is like behavior therapy. It's very different than kind of like typical sit and talk therapy. And so we would do a lot of kind of discrete trial training is what it's officially called with these kids. So we would work on like how to pull on pants, how to zip a zipper, how to put on shoes, your letters, your shapes, the difference between an apple and a banana. And so I did the way the center was set up, I did some individual sessions with kids, but primarily I was in their classroom just based on my background. And so I did a lot of kind of social skills work and a lot of work with the kids as a group. And I was there for a year. And I think while I was there, a few different things happened. I was realizing that I really liked that individual work with the kids. I really liked kind of building those one-on-one relationships, and I was really drawn to that piece of it. They had a psychologist on staff at the center who would work with the families of these children, because having a child with special needs can be really taxing on the families. And so I was also really interested in that piece of it, and like the just kind of getting to address the emotions, all the challenges that go with that. And then I also just started realizing that I loved the children that I worked with. I also realized that I think the behavior therapy method for me wasn't necessarily the best fit. And I think they do a lot of amazing work in the schools we work with, really great behavior analysis. But I wanted to also address kind of the emotions and the cognitive piece and work with kids with trauma. And so I realized I wanted to go in a little bit of a different direction. So started kind of researching ways to get into more of that kind of clinical therapy piece. And so I looked into counseling programs, psychology programs, social work programs, and ultimately landed on social work. I liked that it was very diverse. There's social workers everywhere. And so I loved that idea that I could work in different settings, that if I didn't want to do the direct clinical, there were different kind of roles that I could take. And I also really liked just the values that social work stood for. So I applied to some social work programs, got in to a master's program in social work, and then started doing that. While I was there, I had a couple different field placements. I did one at a rehab center for moms who are addicted to substances with young children. And so I learned a lot from that. Also felt like that wasn't necessarily where I really wanted to be. And so my second field placement was in a school. And it makes me laugh thinking about it because we didn't have a whole lot of choice in our field placements. And when I got assigned to this, it was a middle school. I was very much like, I know I don't want to be in a school. I don't think that's going to be a great fit for me. Like I've never wanted to be in a school. And I went into it and I loved it. There's so many things I like about it. So I finished up that degree, started applying different places, but a lot of schools. And then got hired at STARS. And this is my 6th year with them. And it makes me laugh because I always said I wasn't going to be in a school. And now there's so many things I like about it.
I love that. I think it's so funny how things can change like that, where you're so certain that that's not what you want to do. I for a long time thought I wanted to be a teacher and realized pretty early on that, all the intricacies that comes with teaching was not quite for me. But I still got an undergrad degree I did dual, and I did both social work and education because I liked that part of it. I liked the education part of it. And I also like hearing you mention ABA because I also got a minor in ABA, and that's one of my favorite things to hear people talk about. I think you're the first one we've had on who has mentioned ABA and stuff relating to that. So it's very, very cool to hear you say that. And I like hearing too that, things do change, like you can make those changes and they don't have to be, end of the world kind of things. I know some people get stuck in thinking, having to make a change is the end of the world, like you've done something wrong. And just to hear that it's, part of a natural process to get to where you eventually end up is probably very relieving for some people, for sure.
I also was blown away by how you had so much uncertainty for so long, and yet you kept going forward because there was something, in each placement, in each degree that, was feeding you in some way. And so to know that there are times where you just kind of are unsure, but you can still find a way to add value to what you're doing and to see value within yourself. I was really happy to hear that too, because I know a lot of people experience that, and it can cause them to feel stuck. So it's good to know that there are other people who have experienced it. I think you said all the way up until you hit stars.
Yes, I think so. I think it's probably a lot more common. I don't know. We have this idea you go to college at 18 and you know what you're going to do and you declare your major and you have your life. And I think that's probably the exception rather than the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, too, I know education isn't necessarily like a cut and dried, mental behavioral health field, but there are so many different parts of it that you can do, like you said. And I think having an education degree, I mean, you got your master's in education and it, put you in a place where it did lead to this career. And I think that's good for people to hear as well, that, you can go in for education and do so many things with an education degree. There's very little limits to what you can use an education degree for. And I think that's empowering for people to hear who I know I have a couple of friends who are teachers who are, maybe not quite so happy with what they're doing because of different things. And they end up wanting to see something new, but it's hard to imagine anything else. When you go for education, you think teacher, and that's cut and dried, all there is. So definitely good for people to hear, there are other options.
I mean, I would never thought about education and museums. I was like, wow, I want to hear more about that. So as you said, it's so expansive was, I mean, I was like, wow, I have to make a mental note to go look that up.
Yeah. There's so many different routes. It was like the Country Music Hall of Fame of all places. I never even thought that I was there for about a year with their education team.
Wow.
So many roads.
I love that. So I know we've talked a little bit about how, you've changed a couple times with what you've thought you've wanted to do, but did you always know, I know you said you wanted to work with kids. Was that something you always knew you wanted to do? Or like going into what you did for your undergrad degree, is that something you always knew you wanted to be a part of?
Not really, which should not surprise anybody after what I just said, but no, I mean, I think I always knew even growing up, that I related well to young kids. I really liked working with young kids. And so it was something I was interested in. But when I started undergrad, I was undecided for quite a few years and just taking different classes, taking all over. I think I actually took a couple social work classes, and those ended up being my favorite classes in undergrad. But no, it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of just trying things out and seeing what really felt like the best fit for me.
Yeah. I like that. I like that it's not sort of like it's not so cut and dried. I think that's something people need to get out of this whole thing. It's just, it's not so like one step after another. Because I think people do get caught up in that. I know you just mentioned, how like knowing what you want to do at 18 when you first start college is the exception. And I agree wholeheartedly. There's no way that me at 18 knew what she wanted to do with the rest of her life.
I wish there was a way to take away that feeling, because honestly, even as you continue to build, when you've changed from that decision at 18, 19, and 20, even if you get 2 more degrees, there's still something in you that's kind of like, oh man, did I waste time with that? Or, so I would love to find a way to destigmatize the choices early, because you have so many experiences that can change your interest or change what is your heart work. So I don't know. We got to figure that out, guys.
I agree. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, like in the school system, what you were talking about earlier as well. A lot of people think school system, like teachers, that's what the school system does. And I didn't even know like school-based therapist was a thing. It was a job you could have. But even being in the schools, there's so many different roles and people are so fluid in their roles. So we've got social workers, we've got psychologists, we've got school counselors. I've seen teachers who have taught for several years, and we just had one who went back to school to get her degree in school counseling because she wanted to move that way. So I think even as you get older, like it's always fluid and it's always changing.
Yeah. And I think it's so I think there's some stereotype somewhere that it has to be, you decide when you're 18, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And that's all there is to it. And that's just so unrealistic, I think. And honestly, if there was a way for me to tell everybody, hey, go get your, gen eds out of the way at a community college and work for a couple of years and figure out what you like and what you're passionate about, and then make the decision to come back. It is harder to come back after I know it is, but I think it's so worth it to, spend the amount of money that you're going to spend on something that you're truly passionate about, because you get there and I know I have plenty of friends who get to graduation day and they're like, what did I even just do for the last 4 years? And it's so interesting. And I mean, there's also people on the other side of that coin. So I don't know where the happy medium is, because I also have friends who, they knew exactly like what their research they wanted to do, where they wanted it to take them. So it's an interesting problem that we have on this coin.
It is.
If you could go back in time, would you have taken a different pathway at all?
So this is a very interesting question to me. I think on a personal level, I would go no, because I think I've had a lot of really cool experiences, a lot of very diverse experiences, and I've learned so much from those and just from the different pieces that I pull into the work that I do every day now. So I think that's been helpful. And all of those experiences have kind of gotten me to where I am now. And I like where I am now. So I don't know that I would necessarily change it for me personally. If I could tell others to do it differently, I would probably say yes. Because just like what you were talking about, I think there's definitely more direct paths to get there. There's ways to save time and a whole lot of money to get there. I know in some social work programs, like if you do your undergrad in social work, you can get your master's in just a year. You can do it a lot faster. I think kind of piggybacking off of what you were saying, just having as many experiences as you can before you get to college or before you do a master's program. So going back to undergrad and having like many more diverse experiences. I think there were so many where either I didn't feel like I was capable of doing them, or I didn't think they would be interesting, so I didn't do them. And really now I look back and laugh. I'm like, you're not supposed to feel like you're capable when you're 18 years old. Like that's the time when you're supposed to learn. So I think that's what I would, if I could go back, or if I could tell people to do it a little differently, like get as many experiences as I can. Maybe take that time off after undergrad, take that time to like really explore and try out different things, even if it's volunteer opportunities, just really kind of get a feel for it before you kind of make that commitment moving forward. So that's a very roundabout answer to your question.
I love that though. I think that's, in a similar vein as to what most people have said to the answer to this question is no, I probably wouldn't change what I've done, because I like where I'm at and I, like the opportunities that I've found along the way. I think it's interesting though to hear you detail like, no, I wouldn't change it, but for sure there was an easier way to get here, or for sure there was a more streamlined way to get here. Because I think that's something people miss. And I think it's, definitely a good take for people to hear, like, my version does not have to be your version, and your version won't be the same as your neighbor's version, that kind of deal. So definitely good for people to hear, I like where I'm at and I'll keep working towards whatever we're working towards in the future. But but,
So
not
can't
wanting to
take some
change it.
shortcuts that benefit you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Away from the
here's
traditional
here's the
path.
list of shortcuts that I've missed out on. Like
Uh-huh.
I scoped out the route and here you go.
Yes, I think that's always helpful to hear. You can do it this way. There's also a much more
Mhm.
direct path to get
Yeah.
there.
Like we're playing shoots and
Right,
ladders.
learn from us.
Uh, all right. Well, our final question for you is just what would you suggest to young people who are trying to identify whether or not a possible career in the behavioral health field is right for them?
Yes, that's a great question. I think a couple things come to mind. First, just piggybacking of what we just talked about, I think getting as much kind of real world, like field experience as you can, even in middle school, high school, that is, I think, way more valuable. You'll learn so much more about a job, like what the ins and outs are, than I think you could ever learn in a classroom. So if that's volunteer opportunities, if it's a high school externship, also one of the things I really loved about the first grad school program that I did is that we had these assignments called, they were a certain type of informational interviews is what they were called, where we had to go around to people in different settings, settings we would never think about. And we had to ask them kind of, what is your day to day? And I think that question in particular, it just really helped me kind of learn, because you can learn all about the careers when you're in school, but knowing what does it look like on a day-to-day basis? Is it a lot of paperwork? Is it a lot of interaction with parents? Is it always kind of routine and you know what you're going to do? Or do you come in and it's fast paced and it's flexible and it's, you never know what you're going to get? Like hearing the specific day-to-day, I think really is helpful because it helps you know, like, do I work well in that kind of environment? Is that environment I would thrive in? Is that something that would just stress me out and I don't want to be there? Should I go a different route? And we would also ask, some of my favorite questions in there were like, what's your best part of your job? What's the hardest part of your job? Because I think that also really helped me in those interviews figure out, okay, is this something like am I drawn to the parts that they say are the best parts? Because that's important. Like that's going to keep me motivated. And the hard parts, is that something like I feel like I'm equipped to handle, or I can figure out ways how to handle those. So I guess that would be kind of part one, is just doing as much kind of in the field research as you can, volunteering, asking people, doing interviews. And I think when I was younger, I was very hesitant to ask people. I didn't want to be a burden to people. I didn't want to take up their time. But most people, I think, are very willing and very friendly. Like, I will sit here and tell you about what I'm going to do. So don't be afraid to ask. And then I think I would also say just figuring out what your values are, and figuring out if the job that you are considering lines up with those values. And that's something I don't think I ever talked about values when I was in middle school or high school. But even now with my elementary school students, I do that all the time with them. Like, let's figure out what matters to you. And values aren't right or wrong. It's just the things that are important. So things like kindness, compassion, treating everybody with dignity and worth of a person is a big social work value. And so for me, those are important, I think, because it's a tough field. It's not kind of a routine field. I think no matter what setting you're in, especially in the school setting, you have really, really good days and your hard days are pretty hard. And it can be really physically and mentally and emotionally exhausting. And so on those hard days, what really keeps me kind of coming back and motivated is like lining up with my values. Like, oh yes, this job really matters to me because this lines up with my values and what I find important. So I think kind of nailing down, and not that it has to stick in stone, your values can change, but figuring out like what really matters to you and how can I use that in this job? If I can, like, does that job line up with this? So that would be another thing I think is just kind of important to figure out as you're trying to decide what career you want.
I really like that. And I think the only thing that sticks out to me when I hear you say that is just thinking too about like life outside of work is, so like even if your work isn't necessarily your, epitome of your dream job, making sure in your daily life you're doing things that line up with your values. So like if your health is important to you, doing things to better your health, or if volunteering is important to you, doing things outside of your, normal 9 to 5 or whatever hours you keep. I think people, probably forget, their values,
should drive your
they should
decision.
drive your
Right.
decisions. They should be what you're passionate about. And even if you can't, make it work to have that be your work full time, being
Mhm.
able to have part of that as part of your, personal life, I think is important as well.
Right.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I think figuring out how you can incorporate those into different parts of your life is super important.
Mhm.
And I love what you said also about kind of figuring out how do you take care of yourself outside of work, because I think that's a big, especially with the behavioral health field too. Where
Mhm.
you need to have that, like the ways that you figure out this. I had a really hard day. How am I going to take care of myself? Or even
Mhm.
when you have good days, like how am I going to sit here and fill up my cup so that I can kind of pour into others too?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't hear a lot of centering yourself, centering your values, aligning it with your like choice and direction for choosing fields. So I think that that might be a huge missing piece. When you think about it, it's really you typically are thinking, I want them to hire me because they've got all of these things that they're doing. But it's hard for us to reflect the mirror back and think, what do they have that I value the most? So I think starting, of course, you're in a great position with younger children to start thinking about it in that way so that they're not kind of caught in the rat race like so many who kind of just end up somewhere and trying to match just, getting your basic needs met instead of, higher experiential things. So I love hearing that, choosing that as, an option.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right. Well, we don't have any other questions for you, but I want to say we're so thankful and grateful for you to, being a part of this and taking the time out of your day to be with us on this interview. And we appreciate your insight on all of this as well.
Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate you and this whole project. I think is really wonderful. Just reaching out to young people and telling them the different paths. I think that's something would have been great for me. Just kind of knowing again, getting that kind of experience and seeing what jobs exist.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
All right. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to listen to our podcast brought to you by the Smart Connections podcast from the Smart Center at the University of Memphis, as well as the Pathways to Behavioral Health Careers project. If you or anyone you know needs any information from the Smart Center, please contact us at 901-678-1636 or email us at smartcenter@memphis.edu. You can also learn more about us at our website, memphis.edu/smartcenter.